Being single is not a setback. It is not a failure. It is not proof you're broken. It is not a sign you're behind. For a man, being single can be the most misunderstood advantage in modern life because it's one of the only seasons where you can hear your own mind without someone else constantly pulling on it. And that is exactly why so many people try to shame you out of it. They want you to believe your worth is measured by being chosen, by being desired, by being locked in, by being approved of, because a man who believes that will tolerate almost anything to avoid being alone. He will accept disrespect as long as he gets attention. He will lower his standards as long as he feels wanted. He will chase chaos because it feels like connection. He will stay in relationships that drain him because leaving would mean silence. And silence is where the truth lives. Most men don't fear being alone because solitude is inherently painful. They fear it because nobody taught them how to use it. They were trained to escape it. They were trained to treat quiet like an emergency, stillness like weakness, being alone like a verdict. So the moment loneliness shows up, they reach for noise, they reach for dating apps, they reach for old flames, they reach for cheap validation, they reach for women they already know they shouldn't be texting. Not because those women are right for them, but because the quiet feels heavier than the consequences of settling. But here is the first truth that changes everything. A man doesn't get destroyed by being alone. He gets destroyed by what he chooses when he's afraid to be alone. That's why if you're single right now, I'm not going to tell you to stay positive. I'm going to tell you something more useful. You're protected. Protected from the wrong dynamic. Protected from the wrong woman. Protected from the wrong version of yourself. Because singlehood, when you use it correctly, is life. Clearing space for you to build structure. And structure is what most men are missing. Not love, not sex, not attention, structure. The internal structure that makes you hard to manipulate, hard to shame, hard to bait into drama, hard to derail. A single man with structure becomes dangerous in the best way. Dangerous to illusions, dangerous to manipulation, dangerous to anyone who needs him thirsty and distracted. Because when a man is alone and he stops running, something rare happens. He starts seeing clearly. He stops negotiating with his instincts. He stops calling red flags potential. He stops mistaking chemistry for compatibility. He stops confusing attention with connection. And once a man gains that clarity, he becomes harder to control. That's why nobody celebrates your single years. They try to convince you they don't matter. They call them a dry spell. They call them wasted time. They call them lonely. They call them sad. But they never call them what they really are, training. Because training seasons don't look glamorous. They look quiet. They look boring from the outside. They look like nothing is happening. Yet everything is happening. Your mind is recalibrating. Your instincts are sharpening. Your standards are rising. Your self-respect is returning. Your tolerance for nonsense is shrinking. And that's a threat to a world that profits from distracted men. Let me paint you a picture. A man gets home after a long day. He sits in his apartment, quiet. No girlfriend texting him. No drama to manage. No emotional chaos. No performance required, just silence. At first, it feels strange, almost uncomfortable, like you're missing something, but then the silence starts doing its job. You start remembering things you ignored, you start noticing how certain patterns repeat, you start realizing the last relationship didn't fail because you weren't enough. It failed because you kept negotiating your boundaries for peace you never received, and you start seeing that a lot of what you called love was actually fear. Fear of losing her, fear of starting over, fear of being alone, fear of not being chosen. That fear makes men do humiliating things. It makes men tolerate disrespect. It makes men overinvest early. It makes men chase women who aren't qualified to be in their lives. It makes men confuse desire with destiny. And that leads to the second truth. The biggest relationship mistakes men make aren't made in relationships. They're made in solitude when a man refuses to sit with himself. Because when a man can't handle his own mind, he'll use people to escape it. He'll confuse companionship with connection. He'll confuse comfort with compatibility. He'll confuse attention with love. And then he'll wake up 5 years later wondering why he feels exhausted, bitter, and older than he should. This is why older men look tired. It's not just work. It's emotional wars they never should have fought. It's years spent managing moods, negotiating boundaries, tolerating double standards, and calling it commitment. So if you're single right now, you're not in a waiting room. You're in a training ground. And the first part of the training is learning to distinguish two pains, the pain of loneliness and the pain of regret. Loneliness is temporary. It comes and goes. It can be uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to destroy you. Regret is what destroys men. Regret is what you feel when you realize you stayed too long. You compromised too much. You ignored your instincts. You paid for affection. You abandoned your purpose. You sacrificed your future to satisfy someone else's mood. Loneliness is a passing storm. Regret is a permanent scar. So if you're going to choose a pain, choose the one that builds you. Choose loneliness because loneliness can be trained. Choose loneliness because loneliness can become strength. Choose loneliness because loneliness teaches you who you are when no one is clapping. Now, let's talk about the modern dating environment because men need to understand what they're walking into. Modern dating doesn't reward integrity. It rewards visibility. It doesn't reward loyalty. It rewards performance. It doesn't reward maturity. It rewards stimulation. The loudest people get the most attention, and the most stable people often get overlooked because stability doesn't shout. Discipline doesn't beg to be seen. Humility doesn't broadcast itself. The women who actually have the traits men claim they want, emotional maturity, self-respect, accountability, calm, are often private, focused, busy building their lives, not because they're better than anyone, but because they're not addicted to being seen, which means they're harder to find. And this frustrates men because most men want easy access. They want quality to walk into their feed and announce itself. They want a shortcut to a high-quality partner. But quality rarely comes with neon lights. Meanwhile, attention culture amplifies a certain type of personality, the attention-driven, validation-hungry, chaos-normalized mindset that confuses intensity with intimacy. And here's the principle that will save you years. A woman addicted to attention will never be satisfied by affection. Affection is personal, private, steady. Attention is public, endless, addictive. So even if you love her, she can still feel hungry. Because her hunger isn't for love, it's for validation. And that's why so many men today are confused. They say, I give her everything. Why is she still dissatisfied? Because you're trying to feed a bottomless pit with your peace. Some people, men and women, can't tolerate calm because calm forces them to face themselves. Chaos keeps them distracted. Chaos gives them a story. Chaos gives them a reason to feel alive without building anything real. So they chase intensity. They chase drama. They chase unpredictability, and if you're a man who values peace, purpose, and progress, that type of person will eventually treat you like a problem. They will call you boring. They will call you controlling. They will call your standards insecurity. They will call your boundaries fear of love. But it's not fear of love. It's self-respect. And this is why being single matters. Because singlehood gives you the distance to see these dynamics clearly before you get emotionally invested. Men don't get trapped because they're stupid. They get trapped because they're hungry. Hunger makes you blind. Hunger makes you romanticize red flags. Hunger makes you ignore disrespect because you're grateful for attention. Hunger makes you call manipulation love because you don't want to admit you're being used. So a man must learn to become full on his own. Not full of ego, full of stability. Full enough that he doesn't need a relationship to calm his anxiety. Full enough that he doesn't need a woman's approval to feel like a man. Full enough that he can walk away from the wrong dynamic without collapsing. Because the man who can walk away has power, and power changes how you date. Now, let's make this practical. If you're single, you're in the only season where you can build the internal structure that protects you later. Most men enter relationships without boundaries, discipline, standards, emotional control, purpose, identity. So they become easy to move. They accept anything. And when you accept anything, you eventually lose everything. Not because the world is cruel, because you didn't build a filter. A man without standards is a man without a gate. If you don't guard access to your life, anything enters. Chaos enters, disrespect enters, double standards enter, manipulation enters, and you call it love because you didn't have the self-respect to reject it early. Your single season is where you build the gate. So, what does that look like? It starts with one hard decision. You stop using women as a distraction from your own mind. You stop chasing validation. You stop living for attention. You stop filling every quiet moment with noise. Because silence is where you become dangerous. Silence is where you become honest. And honesty is where your life starts changing. At first, solitude will feel like withdrawal. Because many men are addicted to stimulation. Not just sexual stimulation, emotional stimulation. They're addicted to the chase, addicted to messaging, addicted to the dopamine hit of being wanted. addicted to the drama that makes them feel important. So when you remove that, your brain protests. It tries to pull you back into old habits. It whispers, text her. It whispers, download the app. It whispers, you're missing out. It whispers, you need someone. But here's what you learn when you endure that discomfort. That voice isn't truth. It's conditioning. It's the part of you that mistakes loneliness for danger. And once you survive it, you realize something powerful. You can feel loneliness without obeying it. You can feel the urge without acting on it. You can feel discomfort and still choose discipline. That is masculinity in real form. Not loud, not performative, not aggressive, controlled, because a man who controls himself is free. Now let's talk about freedom. Because freedom is what singlehood can give you if you stop treating it like a punishment. Freedom is the ability to say no. No to the wrong woman. No to disrespect. No to chaos. No to cheap attention. No to being used. And you cannot say no if you're afraid of being alone. That's why the first thing you build in singlehood is your tolerance for solitude. Not by isolating yourself into misery, but by learning to be alone without collapsing. That means you build a life that doesn't require constant external stimulation to feel meaningful. Because the man who cannot be alone will accept almost any relationship, and the man who accepts any relationship will eventually live a life he doesn't respect. So, what do you build? You build 5 pillars, not as motivational nonsense, as structure. Pillar 1, your body, not for vanity, not for approval, not for social media, for discipline. Training teaches you a lesson most men never learn. You can be uncomfortable and still move forward. That lesson changes everything. It makes you harder to manipulate because you're no longer running from discomfort. You can sit in the tension. You can hold your frame. You can endure temporary loneliness without buying temporary relief. A man who trains consistently becomes physically stronger, yes, but more importantly, he becomes mentally durable. Pillar 2. Your finances, not to flex, to be free. Money isn't status. Money is options. Money is the ability to leave. Money is the ability to move. Money is the ability to choose. Money is the ability to say no without fear. A man who is financially unstable is easy to trap. He's easy to manipulate into staying. He's easy to pressure. He's easy to shame. A stable man does not enter relationships because he needs someone. He enters because he chooses. Pillar 3, your mind. Read, study, learn. Most men get manipulated because they don't understand human behavior. They think love is enough. It isn't. Love without standards becomes self-destruction. So learn about attachment styles, learn about emotional regulation, learn about boundaries, learn about communication, learn the patterns of manipulation, love bombing, intermittent reinforcement, guilt tactics, silent treatment, triangulation. Not so you can become paranoid, so you can become aware. Awareness turns confusion into clarity. Pillar 4, your boundaries. Boundaries are the price of access to your life. If your boundaries are soft, you will always attract people who push. And here's the truth. You teach people how to treat you. If you tolerate disrespect early, you normalize it. If you accept chaos early, you invite it. If you negotiate your standards, you lose them. Boundaries are not cruelty. They're protection. Pillar 5, your mission. A man without a mission becomes obsessed with women because he has nothing bigger to aim at. A relationship becomes his purpose. That's a trap. Your mission doesn't have to be grand, but it has to be real. It has to force you to grow. It has to require discipline. It has to give your life direction. When you have direction, you stop chasing distractions. Now, here's what happens when you build these pillars. You stop chasing. Not because you're pretending to be unavailable, because you're actually occupied with your own life. And that's when the entire dynamic changes. You stop being a man trying to be chosen. You become a man deciding who qualifies. That is the shift. And once you make that shift, modern dating stops confusing you because you're no longer looking for someone to fill a hole. You're looking for alignment. You're looking for someone who fits the life you're building. And that's why singlehood is an advantage. It teaches you to value alignment over intensity because intensity is cheap. It's easy to create. It's easy to fake. Alignment is rare. Alignment requires discipline. Alignment requires honesty. Alignment requires stability. Alignment requires 2 people who can regulate themselves. Now, let's talk about the type of man you become when you master solitude. You become a man who is not emotionally hostage to attention. If she pulls away, you don't chase. If she tests you, you don't panic. If she tries to bait you into drama, you don't bite. Not because you're cold, because you're grounded. Grounded men. Don't get dragged into nonsense. Grounded men don't negotiate their values. Grounded men don't beg to be chosen. Grounded men don't fear starting over. And the reason grounded men don't fear starting over is because they've built a life that stands without anyone in it. They don't need a relationship to feel like a man. They need purpose. Now, here's something men need to hear, because it's the opposite of what you've been told. A relationship is not a trophy. It's a risk assessment. Every woman you let into your life comes with risk. Not because women are bad, because humans are complex. The wrong woman can cost you your peace, your focus, your finances, your reputation, your momentum, your mental health, your relationship with your kids if it goes that far. Men don't like talking about that because it feels unromantic, but life doesn't care about romance, life cares about outcomes. So a man must learn to evaluate, and evaluation requires emotional control. A man with emotional control can look at a woman and not get hypnotized by beauty. He can observe her behavior. He can ask, does she bring peace or chaos? Does she take accountability or blame? Does she respect boundaries or test them? Does she build her life or outsource it? Does she communicate or manipulate? Does she handle no with maturity or punishment? A good woman is not identified by looks. She's identified by behavior, how she handles disappointment, how she reacts to boundaries, how she treats people with no power, how she communicates under stress, how she speaks about her past, how she manages her own life, how she apologizes, how she forgives, how she stays consistent. A man who has mastered solitude can see all of this because he is not desperate. He can want her, but he doesn't need her. That is the difference between love and dependence. Dependence makes you tolerate chaos. Love makes you require alignment. Now, let's address the biggest lie modern culture sells men. The lie is that being wanted is the same as being valued. It's not. A lot of men are wanted for what they provide, not for who they are. A lot of men are kept around for attention, resources, convenience, and stability. And men accept it because they confuse being useful with being loved. Singlehood gives you the chance to break that confusion, because when you're alone, you start asking, who am I without what I provide? Who am I when no one is clapping? Who am I when no one is texting? Who am I when no one is validating me? That question is painful, but it's necessary, because if your identity is built only on being useful to others, you will eventually feel empty, and emptiness makes men desperate. Desperate men are easy to control. So singlehood gives you the chance to build an identity that isn't dependent on someone else's approval. And when you build that identity, you stop fearing loneliness, because you realize loneliness was never the problem. The problem was you didn't have a life you respected. When a man respects his life, he doesn't fear being alone. He might prefer companionship, but he doesn't require it. And that's the most powerful position a man can be in. Now, let's make this even more real. There are men listening to this who are single, and they don't feel empowered. They feel frustrated. They feel invisible. They feel like they're falling behind. So let me talk to you directly. If you're single and it hurts, that doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. But what you do next determines everything. You can either use this pain as fuel to build, or you can use it as an excuse to chase. Chasing feels good in the moment. It gives you a rush. It gives you the illusion of progress. It gives you something to do. But chasing without standards leads to regret. Building is slower. It's quieter. It's not flashy. It's not instantly rewarded. But building creates a life that cannot be stolen. A man who builds himself becomes calm, and calm is power. Calm men don't argue their worth. Calm men don't compete for attention. Calm men don't get pulled into chaos. They choose. And that is why being single is dangerous, because it teaches you how to choose. Now, there's another layer to this that most men don't realize. Singlehood also reveals your real weaknesses. In relationships, men can hide. They hide behind being needed. They hide behind being busy. They hide behind drama. They hide behind the constant motion of maintaining something. But when you're alone, there's nowhere to hide. If you're undisciplined, you'll see it. If you're addicted to validation, you'll feel it. If you're avoiding your purpose, you'll notice it. If you're insecure, it will surface. And that's why a lot of men hate being single, because it forces honesty. And honesty is uncomfortable. But honesty is also the doorway to change. So instead of running from solitude, you learn to use it like a forge, the same way fire forges steel. You stop asking, why am I alone? And you start asking, what is this season trying to build in me? Because life doesn't waste seasons. Men waste seasons. Men waste years chasing temporary women, temporary validation, temporary highs. They waste money on dates with women who don't respect them. They waste energy on texting games. They waste time in situationships that go nowhere. They waste focus fighting for people who were never aligned. And then they wake up older, tired, and behind, not because they were single, but because they didn't use singlehood. So here's a challenge. If you are single, treat it like a military phase, not in the sense of aggression, in the sense of discipline. A disciplined man is a free man. When you wake up, you do what you said you would do. You train, you work, you build, you study, you handle responsibilities, you keep promises to yourself, you build trust with yourself. And that is where confidence really comes from. Not compliments, not attention, self-trust. When you trust yourself, you stop chasing validation because you don't need it. Now, let's talk about what happens when a man builds himself correctly. He becomes selective. He starts noticing that most people aren't aligned with him, and he stops taking that personally. He stops trying to convince people to choose him. He stops trying to rescue women from their chaos. He stops trying to be the good man who proves his worth through suffering. He becomes the man who is peaceful, stable, and firm. And firm doesn't mean rude. Firm means you don't move easily, your standards don't bend because someone is attractive, your boundaries don't disappear because someone is charming, your purpose doesn't get negotiated down because someone demands attention. That's what it means to be a man with structure. Now, when that man enters a relationship, he doesn't lose himself. He doesn't bend to avoid conflict. He doesn't hide his truth to preserve someone else's comfort. He doesn't accept instability because he knows what stability feels like. He doesn't tolerate disrespect because he has mastered the art of walking away. This is the man your single season can create, but only if you stop treating your single season like a problem. Only if you stop letting society shame you into rushing. Because rushing is what destroys men. Rushing makes you choose the wrong woman. Rushing makes you ignore red flags. Rushing makes you settle. Rushing makes you sacrifice your future for temporary comfort. So here is the closing truth. You are not being punished by being single. You are being prepared. The silence is not emptiness. It is recalibration. It is your instincts sharpening. It is your standards rising. It is your self-respect rebuilding. It is your life becoming too valuable to share with someone unworthy of it. So don't waste this season. Master it. Build your body until strength is normal. Build your mind until clarity is automatic. Build your finances until you have options. Build your mission until you don't crave distractions. Build your standards until chaos can't enter. Stay single until you can walk alone without hesitation. Because the moment you master that, you stop fearing loneliness. And when you stop fearing loneliness, you stop being controllable. And when you stop being controllable, your entire life changes. Stay single until you become the man who doesn't chase peace, because he is peace. Stay single until purpose replaces loneliness. Stay single until your life becomes so solid that a relationship is not your rescue. It's your choice.